4:15 in the morning, the Mediterranean, flat water, no wind. At Haifa Port, Israel's largest naval installation, its primary commercial harbor, the logistical spine of the entire northern military district, the night shift was running normally. Patrol boats circling the perimeter, sailors checking manifests, a destroyer at berth taking on fuel, 2 corvettes anchored in the inner basin, the submarine pen humming with low electrical activity, radar sweeping the horizon, nothing unusual, nothing incoming. Then the horizon changed. At 4:17 a.m., the first contact appeared on radar, 1 low-altitude signature, fast. Coming from the northwest, the operator flagged it. Before that flag was processed, 40 more contacts appeared, then 100. Then the screen became white noise, 400 separate radar returns filling every quadrant simultaneously. The system's threat assessment algorithm had never been asked to process that volume. It froze. The operator reached for the alert button. He was 2 seconds too late. The first wave, Turkish-manufactured Atmaka anti-ship missiles, transferred to the IRGC in a covert arms deal that Ankara spent 6 months denying, struck the outer breakwater at 4:18 a.m. The second wave hit the fuel depot. The third wave, carrying the heaviest warheads in the package, arrived 17 seconds after the second. It struck the berths where Israel's surface fleet sat docked, quiet, anchored, in the geometry of a normal peacetime morning. By 4:31 a.m., 13 minutes after first impact, Hifa Port was no longer a naval installation. It was a fire, the Israeli Navy, the service that had projected Israeli power across the eastern Mediterranean for 6 decades, that had blockaded Gaza, interdicted Iranian weapons shipments, served as the hard edge of Israeli strategic reach beyond its land borders. Gone. As an operational force, gone in 13 minutes. And the United States 6th Fleet, operating less than 300 nautical miles away in international waters, received every radar track, every missile trajectory, every impact coordinate in real time. Its destroyers had targeting solutions. Its aircraft were airborne before the first contacts appeared. The order to engage never came. When the sun rose over Haifa, what was left was wreckage, smoke, and a question that nobody in Washington was prepared to answer. What is an alliance worth when its guarantor watches from a safe distance while its partner burns? You are watching U.S. Command Insight, and if you are here for the first time, tonight is the night to understand what this channel is. We do not traffic in comfort. We do not steer your emotions toward a convenient political conclusion. We follow the evidence through the weapons, the strategy, the economics, the politics, and the human calculation behind every major military event reshaping this world. What happened at Haifa this morning is not a news story. It is a strategic earthquake. The aftershocks will reach every corner of the international order. Subscribe now, turn on every notification, because what is developing in front of us in real time is the story of how the world we thought we understood stops being true. 4 questions that cut to the bone of what happened and what it means. First, how does a NATO member state transfer 400 advanced anti-ship missiles to Iran, a country under comprehensive Western sanctions, designated by the United States as a state sponsor of terrorism, without triggering the alliance mechanism specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of defection? Was this a failure of NATO intelligence, a deliberate blind eye, or evidence that the alliance is already functionally broken in ways its public posture refuses to admit? Second, the Atmaka missile was designed with NATO interoperability as one of its core specifications, built to operate within NATO's targeting and communications architecture. When 400 of them flew into Haifa Port this morning, they were not just striking an Israeli naval base. They were demonstrating that NATO technology, NATO engineering doctrine, can be turned against NATO's closest regional partner. What does that mean for every other ally that has purchased or co-developed weapons with Turkey? Third, Israel's naval doctrine has always rested on qualitative superiority, better ships, better sensors, better trained crews. Tonight, that doctrine was not outmatched by a superior adversary. It was erased by volume. 400 missiles is not a qualitative challenge. It is a quantitative eraser. Has the era of the sophisticated small navy reached its end? Fourth, Turkey has now placed itself in a position of direct material responsibility for the destruction of a NATO partner's naval infrastructure and the deaths of Israeli sailors. What does Erdogan think he is buying with this action? And is he right? Let's find out. To understand what happened this morning, you need to understand what Haifa Port was built to survive. Haifa is not simply a harbor. It is the node through which Israel's northern military district is supplied, sustained, and projected. The military section stretches nearly 4 kilometers along the bay, permanent berths for the SAR-class corvette fleet, a submarine tender facility, weapon storage, a command and communications center, fuel storage sufficient to sustain Israeli naval operations for 60 days without resupply. The complex was protected by a layered air and missile defense architecture. The Barak 8 Naval Air Defense System, one of the most capable ship-based missile defense platforms in the world. Iron Dome batteries covering the landside perimeter. Rafael's Sea Dome, the naval variant specifically designed for close-in port defense, installed at Haifa after a 2021 threat assessment identified the facility as a priority Iranian target. On paper, one of the most heavily defended naval installations in the world, the Atmaka missiles did not attack it on paper. Iran's IRGC Aerospace Force planned the strike around a single operational insight. Every layered defense system has a saturation threshold. The question is not whether the system can intercept individual missiles. It can. The question is how many simultaneous engagements it can sustain before it runs out of interceptors. Before its fire control radar is overwhelmed by target assignments it cannot process. Before the gap between a detected threat and an impacted target compresses below the system's minimum reaction window. 400 missiles launched in coordinated waves from multiple vectors was the answer to that question. The first wave, 80 missiles, came from the northwest, from the open Mediterranean, launched from Iranian naval vessels operating under commercial cover that had positioned themselves over a period of weeks in international shipping lanes. This vector was chosen deliberately. The Barak 8 system's optimal engagement geometry is designed around threats approaching from the east and northeast, from Lebanese territory, from Syrian coastal positions. A threat from the open sea to the northwest puts the system in a degraded engagement posture. It reduces the effective range at which intercepts can be attempted. The second wave, 120 missiles, came 6 seconds behind the first, from the northeast, the conventional attack axis. But timed to arrive simultaneously with the first wave, forcing the fire control system to split its engagement capacity across 2 simultaneous threat streams rather than concentrating on one. The third and fourth waves, the remaining 200 missiles, came from the east and southeast. Low-altitude, terrain-hugging profiles that used the Carmel mountain range to mask their approach until they were inside the minimum engagement range of several defending batteries. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. 2 SAR-6 corvettes managed to clear the inner breakwater before they were struck. 3 did not. The submarine in the maintenance facility never had a chance to move. The fuel depot, 3 million liters of naval fuel, caught in the second wave and produced a secondary explosion large enough to be detected by seismographs in Cyprus. When the last missile impacted, Israel's surface fleet had been reduced from 7 operational vessels to 1. A patrol boat that had been on an offshore training exercise and was not in the harbor. 13 minutes, 6 decades of Israeli naval power gone. The Atmaka, the name means hawk in Turkish, entered operational service with the Turkish Navy in 2021. Subsonic sea skimming, range of approximately 250 kilometers. A 250-kilogram warhead, terminal guidance combining active radar with infrared imaging, a dual-seeker configuration that makes it significantly harder to decoy than single-seeker designs. Its wave-top flight profile, extremely low altitude over water, is specifically engineered to defeat shipboard and shore-based radar systems that struggle to track targets below a certain elevation angle. By any objective assessment, one of the most capable anti-ship missiles currently in production anywhere in the world, built with NATO standards. NATO interoperability specifications, in many cases with components sourced from NATO member states' defense industries. How did 400 of them end up in Iranian hands? The transfer did not happen overnight. The intelligence picture emerging in the hours since the strike from American, European, and Israeli sources who are furious, terrified, and in several cases still disbelieving, describes a covert arrangement constructed over approximately 18 months and executed through a chain of intermediaries, shell companies, and third-country transit points sophisticated enough to avoid detection until the missiles were already inside Iranian territory. The arrangement reportedly originated in a bilateral negotiation between Erdogan's government and senior IRGC commanders on the margins of a regional economic summit. Iran did not simply pay for the missiles in cash. The currency of the deal included Iranian commitments on Kurdish militant networks along the Turkish-Iranian border, intelligence sharing on opposition figures, and economic arrangements tied to Turkey's role as a sanctions bypass corridor for Iranian oil. This is how the new geopolitics works. Weapons, intelligence, economic access, political commitments, bundled together in arrangements that defy simple categorization as either alliance or enmity. Turkey is a NATO member that just armed Iran with weapons capable of destroying a NATO partner's navy. Both of those facts are simultaneously true. The international order does not currently have a framework for processing that reality. Turkey has been a NATO member since 1952. It hosts American nuclear weapons at Incirlik Air Base. It controls the Bosphorus, the only maritime passage between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, giving it a choke point of extraordinary strategic value. Its military is the second largest in NATO by personnel. Its geographic position, bridging Europe, the Middle East, the Caucasus, and Central Asia, makes it one of the most strategically located states on Earth. It has also, under Erdogan, become something NATO's founding architects could not have conceived, a member of the Western Alliance simultaneously developing deep strategic relationships with Russia, China, and now, demonstrably, Iran. The S-400 purchase in 2019 was the first major rupture. Washington removed Turkey from the F-35 program and imposed Katsay sanctions. Erdogan absorbed the punishment and kept the S-400. The message was explicit. Turkey's strategic autonomy is not for sale, and the cost of attempting to discipline Turkey through sanctions is a Turkey that drifts further from the Western orbit. Washington did not fully internalize that message. It treated the S-400 episode as an aberration, a transactional dispute that could be managed, not as evidence of a fundamental reorientation in Turkish strategic thinking. Tonight is the price of that misreading. What Erdogan has done is not simply betray an ally. He has made a deliberate, calculated strategic bet on the outcome of the current global power transition. He has looked at the trajectory of American power, the overextension, the domestic division, the depleted arsenals, the paralysis in the face of Iranian escalation, and concluded that the future belongs to the multipolar order being assembled by Russia, China, Iran, and the global South, not to the unipolar American system that NATO was built to sustain. That bet may be right. History will judge it. What is not in dispute is the immediate consequence. NATO Article 5, the collective defense provision that is the foundation of the entire alliance, has never been invoked in response to aggression by a member state against another member's partner. There is no mechanism in the NATO treaty for expelling a member. No provision for sanctioning a member that uses transferred weapons to facilitate an attack on a partner state. The alliance is confronting a scenario for which its legal and institutional architecture has no answer. Germany has recalled its ambassador to Ankara. France has convened an emergency national security session. The UK has issued a statement describing Turkey's actions as a fundamental violation of alliance solidarity, language that is diplomatically volcanic. Poland and the Baltic states, whose entire security calculus rests on the credibility of collective defense, are experiencing a crisis of confidence in the alliance that may prove impossible to repair. Because if Turkey can do this, if a NATO member can transfer advanced weapons to a sanctioned adversary, weapons that destroy another country's navy while the alliance watches, then the question every NATO member must now ask is, what exactly does this alliance guarantee? The answer is increasingly less than we thought, and possibly not enough. The USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group was 290 nautical miles west of Haifa when the first Atmaka missiles hit the port. Its E-2D Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft had been tracking the Iranian naval vessels in the western Mediterranean for 11 days. Its intelligence teams had flagged the unusual positioning of those vessels. Commercial flagged ships with electronic profiles inconsistent with commercial operations in threat assessments submitted to EUCOM and CENTCOM 6 days before the attack. Those assessments recommended closer surveillance and contingency planning for a potential anti-ship missile threat to Israeli naval assets. The recommendations were received, they were assessed, they were not acted upon. When the missiles flew, the Truman Strike Group had full situational awareness within 30 seconds of the first launches. Its Aegis destroyers, the USS Gravely and USS Cole, had targeting solutions on the Iranian launch platforms within 90 seconds. The FA-18 squadrons were at Alert 5, engines running, pilots strapped in, weapons loaded, within 4 minutes of first impact at Haifa. The order to engage never came. The National Security Council deliberated for 47 minutes. The arguments against engagement were familiar. Direct strikes on Iranian naval vessels would constitute an act of war. Iran had Russian and Chinese backing. The domestic political environment made authorization impossible in the necessary time frame. The legal framework for offensive operations without congressional authorization was contested. The arguments for engagement were also familiar. American commitment to Israeli security, the deterrence precedent being set, the long-term cost to alliance credibility of watching a partner's navy be annihilated in real time. The non-engagement decision was made. The Truman Strike Group was ordered to maintain position, increase its own defensive posture, and await further orders. Those further orders have not come. What the Sixth Fleet's restraint has demonstrated, in a way that no amount of diplomatic language can obscure, is that the American commitment to Israeli security has a threshold, and that threshold excludes direct military action against Iran proper. It excludes operations that risk escalation with Russia or China. It excludes any action whose domestic political cost in the United States exceeds the strategic cost of inaction. Iran knew exactly where that threshold was. Iran's entire operational planning was built around staying on the correct side of it. The Haifa strike did not kill American personnel. It did not directly threaten American assets. It destroyed Israeli naval capability using Turkish missiles, a transaction sufficiently removed from direct Iranian-American confrontation that Washington could construct a political narrative justifying non-intervention. Iran read Washington's decision-making framework with extraordinary precision. That is not luck. That is intelligence. That is what 20 years of patient study of an adversary looks like when it meets a moment of opportunity. Pull back from the burning port. Pull back from the carrier group sitting motionless in international waters. Pull back from the emergency sessions in Brussels, Washington, and Tel Aviv. Look at the Mediterranean from altitude and ask, what is this sea now? For 70 years, the Mediterranean has been an American lake. The Sixth Fleet operated in these waters as the enforcement arm of an American-led order that kept sea lanes open, kept regional powers in their lanes, and provided the military backstop for every diplomatic arrangement from the Suez Crisis to the Abraham Accords. That order rested on a specific assumption that no regional power would be willing to directly challenge American military primacy in the theater, because the cost of doing so was prohibitive and the outcome was not in doubt. Both halves of that assumption are now questionable. Russia is watching. Its Black Sea Fleet, battered by Ukrainian drone attacks but still operational, sits at the northern end of the very sea where Iran just demonstrated that anti-ship missiles can destroy a major naval installation without American response. The calculus of Russian naval commanders thinking about the Bosphorus, about Turkish control of that choke point, about American willingness to respond to aggressive naval action in the Mediterranean, has shifted in ways that will take years to fully understand. China is watching. Its naval planners in Beijing are studying the Haifa battle damage assessment with professional intensity. The lesson they are drawing, that a coordinated saturation strike with modern anti-ship missiles can overwhelm layered naval defenses at a major port facility, is directly applicable to scenarios they plan for in the Western Pacific. The American carrier groups that serve as the primary deterrent to Chinese action against Taiwan operate in an environment where Chinese anti-ship missile capability follows exactly the same saturation logic Iran applied at Haifa. This strike has just provided the most realistic operational test data for that logic that Chinese planners have ever had access to. Deterrence does not work by being tested and surviving. Deterrence works by being so credible that it is never tested. The moment an adversary tests it and finds it wanting even partially, even in a limited scenario, the credibility that makes it function is compromised in ways that are extremely difficult to restore. Here is where we land. Israel is now without a navy in any operationally meaningful sense. Its northern coast, always its most vulnerable approach, is exposed in a way it has not been since 1948. The maritime dimension of Israeli defense, the ability to interdict weapons shipments, project force into Lebanon and Syria from the sea, maintain the naval blockade of Gaza, not degraded, gone. The reconstruction timeline for a navy is not measured in weeks or months. Ships take years to build. Naval infrastructure takes years to repair. Trained naval personnel take years to develop. Even with maximum American financial support and expedited arms transfers, Israel's Navy, as an operational institution, will require a generational effort to reconstitute. Turkey has crossed a threshold from which there is no return. Whatever diplomatic language Erdogan deploys in the coming days, and there will be elaborate, carefully constructed language, the physical reality is that 400 Turkish missiles destroyed an ally's navy. That fact will sit at the center of NATO politics for a generation. The alliance will not expel Turkey. The legal mechanism does not exist, and the strategic cost of losing control of the Bosphorus is too high. But the alliance that exists after today is not the alliance that existed before. It is hollower. It is less trusted. It is a structure whose members now privately calculate their security on the assumption that other members may not be reliable when it matters most. The United States has confirmed through inaction that its willingness to use direct military force has limits, and that those limits are reachable. Every adversary of American power has updated its threat assessment accordingly, and Iran, the country that was supposed to be contained, isolated, gradually pressured into compliance, has demonstrated that it can destroy one of the most heavily defended naval installations in the world using weapons it did not build, launchers it did not manufacture, and a strategic opening it did not create, but was disciplined enough to exploit. That is not luck. That is strategic competence. That is what 20 years of patience looks like when it meets a moment of opportunity. The Mediterranean is not what it was yesterday. The alliances are not what they were yesterday. The deterrence architecture that held this region in a particular kind of order for 70 years is not what it was yesterday. What it becomes tomorrow is the question that will define the next decade of international politics. We will be here for every step of that answer. If you are not subscribed, subscribe now. If you are, share this with everyone you know who is trying to understand a world that is changing faster than the institutions built to manage it can keep up. This is U.S. Command Insight. We will see you in the next one.